Shiro then closed his eyes and began to think out every possible scenario that he could. After several minutes had passed, Shiro once again opened his eyes and Naruto looked at him. So Shiro, what do you think we should do? Naruto asked, looking at the mail in front of him. Shiro sighed, hearing this, and looked at the mail in front of him. I think you two should go with him, Shiro said, looking at the two in front of him. Naruto smiled, hearing this, and stood up a line, excited. Great, then, let's go. To Leslie, and Naruto began only for Shiro to cut him off. I repeat what I just said. I think you two go with him, Shiro said, looking at the blonde male in front of him. You're not coming? Fu asked, looking at the male in front of her. If he really is who he said he is, then train with him. It's truly a once in a lifetime opportunity. It's not something you should pass, but in the case I have to, if we all three went, it'd be just like the tuning exam. I would just be holding you two back, Shiro said, looking at the two in front of him. Naruto was about to speak to the male before he could. Shiro held up his hand and looked at the male in front of him. Yes, I realize what I'm saying. Yes, I thought of this. Yes, I know that what this means for us. And yes, I do have a plan for myself, Shiro said, looking at the male in front of him. Answering all the questions he knew Naruto was going to ask. Hearing this, Naruto looked at him surprised, and Shiro looked up to the two. Don't worry, I'll be fine. It's because I've thought out each scenario that I'm saying this. I'm not returning to Taki. I'll find my own method of training, one where I can utilize this Kikikenkai of mine. Then Shiro said as he stood up, well, all meet back here again in exact town. This is exact room, this spot in exact 3 years, Shiro said, looking at the two in front of him. The room was silent and several minutes as the three looked at each other. Naruto sighed, hearing this, and looked at the male in front of him. Are you sure about this? Naruto said as he looking at the male in front of him. Shiro nodded. Hearing this, Naruto sighed. Then I guess we'll meet in 3 years. Naruto looking at the male in front of him. Shiro seemed shocked to hear this. Naruto smiled. Seeing his expression, what? Don't seem so surprised. I trust your judgment completely. If you think this is what we should do, then I'm not going to argue, Naruto said, looking at the male in front of him. Shiro smiled. Hearing this, and the three stood up. I guess this is where Team 12 finally split up, Fu said, looking at the two of the males in front of her. It's not going to be forever. It's just 3 years, Shiro said, looking at the two in front of him. Yeah, it'll be over before we know it, Naruto said, looking at the two in front of him. Fu nodded, reassured by this, and the two left the room. Shiro sighed, seeing this, and watched as they two walked down the streets. I have to become stronger for them. If not, then I'll be nothing but a burden on them. And that's not what I want, Shiro thought to himself as the two disappeared from the sight. As the two walked down the street, Naruto and Fu once again began holding hands. Naruto looked at the female, giving her a smile to try reassure her. I'm sure he'll be fine, Naruto said, looking at the two in front of him. and Fu nodded as they walked into the bar. The elderly male looked at the two and was about to stop them seeing how young they were, but stopped seeing the headbands they were wearing and let them walk past him. When they did, they almost immediately spotted the elderly male from before. As they approached the male and leaned forward with a smile and looked at them, so the male spoke, looking at them, waiting for a response. "We're coming," said Naruto, looking at the male, causing his smile to widen. "Great," the male said, as he booming voice, as he looked at the two in front of him. "Just one question. What about the other friend you mentioned?" Jiraiya asked, looking at the two in front of him. "He's not coming," Fu said bluntly, looking at the male. "I see," Jiraiya said as he stood up. "Then we don't have any time to waste. Let's leave soon as we can," Jiraiya said as he walked out of the building with the two following behind him. "We're going to make a quick stop somewhere. We want to say goodbye to our friend," Fu said, looking at the elderly male, who nodded and began to follow the two as they began to leave. When they finally arrived at the same time building as before, they noticed that Shiro had already left the room. "Maybe he's in his room," Naruto said as he turned around, opened the door to, as well, oddly clean, as if Shiro had cleaned it before he left. Naruto sighed, seeing this, and looked at Fu. "He might be at the park," Naruto said, looking at the female, knowing that she wanted to give the male a last farewell before they left the city. "No," Fu said, looking at the blonde male in front of her. "If he's already left, then I'll no doubt he's at the park. We should follow his example and leave as well," Fu said, looking at Naruto. The blonde nodded and hearing this, but he could hear the small amount of sadness that was in her voice. The two walked out of the building and rejoined the elderly male and walked out the town. As they did, Naruto grabbed Fu's hand and looked at her with a reassuring smile. "It's not only 3 years. I'm sure that when we meet again, he'll be just as happy to see us," Naruto said, looking at the female, causing her a smile. "Yeah, plus," Fu began as she leaned her head on Naruto's shoulder. "At least I'll still have you," the female said, looking at the two completely left the village with Shiro. The white-haired male was currently walking down a small section of the forest. He planned on going to a small company that his family owned to see what it had to offer him. However, as he was walking, he heard someone talking in the distance and walked towards it. See who was talking. As he came closer to the sound, he noticed that there was also the sound of running water, suggesting that whoever was in the woods was by the river. When he arrived, he saw two males, and just as he thought, the two were by a small river. However, what he didn't expecting was who was standing there. Was he normal enough with onyx eyes and a jet black hair? And however, was oddly enough shark-like features as well as blue skin. However, what made Shiro immediately recognize them as enemies was what the two were wearing. They had long black cloak and red clouds on them. Shiro would have left the two, but the two looked as if they were heading the town he had just come from, which meant that Fu were close to finding Naruto and Fu. Taking a deep breath, Shiro threw two kunais at the two. When he did, the blue-skinned male removed the back of the dodge at the tech, and his partner brought up a hand easily catching between the two fingers. Shiro gritted his teeth, seeing this, and looked at the two as he came out from the tree line. He knew there was no point in hiding. The two were S-class criminals after all. They'd probably find someone like him in a matter of seconds. Well, it seems like we have someone from Taki trying to delay us, Itachi, the male said, looking at his partner. However, he was silent. Hearing this, and the male smiled, seeing the male in front of him. We have enough time for me to have fun right now, Kisame asked, looking at the partner. After a few moments of silence, Itachi looked at the male and spoke. He is an enemy, so try not to take too long, Kisame, Itachi said, looking at the male. When he said this, the male drew his sword and looked at Shiro. Kisame then ran at Shiro. To surprise, despite how the male looked, he was very fast, and Shiro quickly raised his hand, trying to stop the male attack. However, this had a little no effect, as the male brought his sword and slide, sending Shiro into a debris tree. Before Shiro could recover, he felt hand grip around his neck and looked up to see Kisame smiling. Did you really think you had a chance beating me? From what I've seen, you're novice at best. What makes you think you had any chance of winning? Kisame asked as he gripped his on the male's neck, tightening. Ashiro raised his hand, his eyes turning gold. When he did, as he launched a punch at the male, and Kisame held up a hand and stopped the attack. However, when he did, Shiro's fist went through, and the male aimed, turning the water, and large gusts of wind blew the rest of the water away. Shiro gasped for air when the male disappeared and looked at the now soaked ground and a little frustrated that was a clone. I was getting beaten by a half-baked knockoff, Shiro thought to himself, a little frustrated, and looked up, hearing a laugh from the river. I'll give you credit, kid. From the shock wave that proceeded, that could have really hurt. Seems like fighting you close might not be the best idea, the male said. As he ran towards the male, Shiro quickly got up, seeing this, and Kisame began to flash through his hands before clapping them together. Kisame said, as he came to stop, he raised his hand. Shiro tried to jump away, seeing this, but failed, and was soon trapped by a bowl of water. Shiro began to hold his teeth, breath, seeing this, his eyes once again turning gold. Before trying to punch, it's only resulting in small ripples appearing on the surface on the outside. Shiro then threw another punch and another one, before continuing, feeling his lungs starting to burn from lack of oxygen. Damn, Shiro thought as he looked at the bubble he was trapped in. I knew Uncle said to never go past 5%. But if I don't Naruto and full well, 10% can't be that bad, right? Shiro thought to himself as he once again punched the wall, breaking through it and pulling himself out. However, when he did, Itachi and Kisame both noticed the male arm. It was now a bright red color, and steaming was coming off of it. If it had been scorched, Shiro then took a deep breath and looked at the two in front of him. Look at the kid. We're now kind of hurry, and since I'm feeling generous today, I'll let you live. There's no point of continuing if you're going to die, Kisame said, looking at the male in front of him. Damn it, he's right. I don't have a chance against them. This fight is more than one-sided. But if I don't do something, then they'll find it that, Shiro thought to himself, and he rose from the ground. I don't care. I'm not letting you get your hands on Naruto and Fu, Shiro said, looking at the two in front of him. When he said this, Kisame seemed a little shocked, and with slightly more serious expression, looked at the male in front of him. Those are the names of the Jinchuriki we're after, right? Kisame asked, not taking the eyes of Shiro. Yeah. Itachi was blunt and usual, monotone, metal voice. As Kisame sighed as he grabbed his sword and pointed it at the male in front of him. Tell us where they are, and maybe I'll consider letting you live, Kisame said, looking at the male in front of him. Shiro mentally smirked, hearing this, and looked at the male as he got up holding his still injured arm. Glad to see they bought it, Shiro thought as he gave the male confident smirk. If you want to know, then you'll have to catch me first, Shiro said as he leaned down, his eyes turning gold and process and beginning to dash through the woods, taking as many turns as he could to confuse the males as he could. Kisame gritted his teeth, slightly upset, hearing this, and took the woods for the kid. He sure does move fast, Kisame said, as he began to walk into the woods with Itachi following him behind. With Naruto and Fu. Naruto and Fu followed the elderly man for hours before they came to a stop. Reached for a town we're going to in 3 days until they suggested to rest. Once we arrive there, we'll begin your training. But for now, the male said as he pulled a giant scroll off his back and opened it. I'll like you two of you write your name down in blood, Jiraiya said, looking at the two. When he said that, the two nodded and bit their thumbs before writing their names on the paper. When they did, performing a few hand signs, slamming his hands on the ground, a toad with a scroll on his hand back appeared. Jiraiya looked at as if he was about to speak. However, before he could, the toad raised his hand and looked at him. Before you say anything, we can't sign Naruto Uzumaki, the toad said, looking at the male in front of him. Naruto and Fu were both surprised by this, and even Jiraiya had to admit that he didn't expect this to happen. Why not? Jiraiya asked, looking at the small creature in front of him. The frog reached a ground and grabbed the scroll and looked at it. According to this, another summon has already claimed him. Of course, if he were to refuse this, then we could sign him, but until then this contract will them still stand, the toad said, looking at the elderly man in front of him. And Jiraiya turned his attention to the blonde by his side. So, who you have a contract with? Jiraiya asked, looking at the blonde. When he asked this, Naruto seemed a little nervous and looked at him. I don't know, Naruto asked, looking at the male in front of him. And Jiraiya at first was skeptical of the male answer, but something about his tone convinced him was telling the truth. Well, then perform the summoning technique and find out, Jiraiya said, looking at the male. When he said this, Naruto nodded and bit his thumb before performing the hand sign required. Kishino no Jutsu. Naruto yelled as he slammed his hand onto the ground. When he did, a familiar figure appeared in front of him. A small fox that he had spent a week looking for after it had disappeared and he had thought died. Kisune? Naruto said to himself, looking at the fox in front of him. Too fool. It seems like just an ordinary fox, but Naruto remembered the creature perfectly, and he could tell it hadn't aged a bit. It doesn't see you again. I'm good to see you again, Naruto, the creature said, looking at him. Sorry about this. You must be confused. Allow me to explain. I'm sure you remember when we first meet and how immediately bit you after you saved me. Well, using the blood I got from biting you, I forged your name and waiting until you eventually tried to summon to reveal myself, the fox said, looking at Naruto. When he said this, Naruto smiled, happy to see the fox again, and glad to see that even after these years, he remembered who he was. Of course, I understand. If you want to cancel the contract because of my tricking you, but I would be very happy if you finished it, the fox said, looking at Naruto. The blonde nodded hearing this, and the fox smiled, and he pulled out the scroll on his back and rolled it out in front of him. All I need you to do is put your fingerprints in your blood, the fox said, looking at the male beside him. Naruto nodded hearing this and once again bit his thumb before placing the scroll at the fox smile before rolling it back. By the way, my real name is Davis, the creature said before disappearing and puff of smoke. Jiraiya smiled, seeing this, and looked at the two of in front of him. And to think I thought the fuck contract was with a myth, a rumor, Jiraiya said, looking at the two in front of him. Jiraiya then sighed and shrugged this shoulder before turning to the toad. Well, since Naruto already had a contract, well, just have Fu sign, Jiraiya said, looking at the small creature. And it nodded before rolling the scroll. Fu once again signed the contract. Then, just like the fox, the creature disappeared and puffed of smoke. Jiraiya then smiled at the two. Alright, now you two get some sleep and remember, I'll be nearby, so don't do anything dirty, Jiraiya said as he began to walk away before stopping himself. Actually, you know what? I take it back. You two have a lot of fun. I could use some new materials for the book, Jiraiya said as he walked away with a perverse smile on his face. Naruto and Fu both blushed hearing this and slowly moved towards each other before laying down and slowly falling asleep with Shiro. Shiro sighed as he looked at the small fire in front of him. He knew having a campfire was a bad idea since he still had those two after him, but he thought he had ran far away to keep from finding him. Shiro then looked at his hand, which was now covered in bandages, and closed his hand, frustrated with himself. He had even lost 5 minutes against one of them. If Naruto and Fu were there, they might have actually beaten him, Shiro thought to himself as he looked at the fire. Suddenly, a loud crash brought him to his senses as he looked to his side and see a giant dragon made of water moving towards him. His eyes widened. Seeing this before he could move, he hit it the attack and sent it through several trees.